Guitar Business Radio is the podcast for the business of guitar, where you'll always get no reviews, no demos, and no idle chatter. From players to CEOs and in between. If you have a professional or business connection to the world of guitar, this show is your window to insight and information you won't get anywhere else. I'm Jeffrey D. Brown, and I approve this message. So let's get to it. From Guitar Business Media, welcome to the 49th episode of GBR, coming to you from rainy Newport Beach, California, which I guess is good because we need rain to solve the drought problem, although I have a suspicion that even if it does rain for 100 days straight, and it may, we will still have a drought, simply because I think the drought has become a permanent part of the California infrastructure now, and it will never go away under any circumstances. Now, my question to you is, was that in fact idle chatter? You may think so, but it wasn't. It was the introduction to the show. What does that have to do with guitar, you ask? Well, nothing really. It's just part of the introduction. Believe me, there's no idle chatter on GBR, and no reviews or demos either. So, we'll be getting to our extended interview with QSC Chairman of the Board and founder of Quilter Labs, the highly interesting Pat Quilter. We'll get to that in just a few moments, but first, just a few upcoming things to take note of, and be sure to write all this down. First, next week is Winter NAMM. Of course, I will be there with my regular entourage, and we just got these great buttons shipped to us from purebuttons.com, purebuttons.com. I have to put in a plug for these guys because they did such a great job for a very reasonable price, and we got them like a week ahead of schedule. Anyway, they're very cool, large, I guess 3 inches wide, black with our logo and some very clever verbiage. And if you want to see what they look like, if you're curious, go to our Facebook or Twitter pages where we've posted some photos of them. And you can do that at Guitar Business. Find us at Guitar Business on Facebook or Twitter. And if you'll be at NAMM and you see somebody wearing one of these buttons and it turns out to be me, well, you may be in luck, because if you promise to wear it, I will personally give you one. But I only have, 150 or so, so there's going to have to be a while supplies last kind of disclaimer on it. Also, coincidentally, our official NAMM Week episode next week happens to be a very special episode indeed. Next Wednesday, January 23rd, is the 1-year anniversary of GBR, when the trailer was launched. On top of that, it's our 50th episode. Amazing. So, appropriately, we're calling it our Golden First Anniversary Show. Sounds kind of funny, but we're very serious about it. Plus, we'll have a great show for you with our very special guest, guitarist Jennifer Batten. Many of you will know her from her years playing with Michael Jackson and later with Jeff Beck, and she's enjoyed a great career in her own right, and we're very excited to have her on this very special episode of GBR, so don't miss that. And even though it seems like I'm kind of on a roll here, I think I'm going to walk off on a high note, so to speak, and move right on to something completely different. Pat Quilter founded Quilter Sound Company back around 1968, which ultimately became QSC, the pro audio powerhouse that it is today. He's still the chairman of the board of QSC, but in 2011, he went back to his roots and formed Quilter Labs, which has now become a respected builder of high-performance amplification for guitar and bass. It's very innovative stuff. We're going to find out all about it and a lot more as Pat Quilter joins us right here and right now. Well, hey, Pat, it's really great to have you on the show today. I know we've been trying to work this out for quite a while. Thanks for coming on and welcome to GBR.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here finally. And, greetings from sunny Southern California. Having a nice day here. But
I can attest to that.
What's on your mind?
Well, listen, everybody knows we have a sort of a traditional format here, and I vary from it a little bit now and then, but essentially we like to start off with something that we call of historical significance. And I know because, we go back around to the same time, and we knew a few of the same people early on. I'd like to ask everybody what things in the sort of the early part of their life that they feel impacted them significantly in terms of helping them get to where they are today. Everybody's got a different concept of that, but let me present that question to you.
And thinking about that, one thing I can say that obviously matters, we did have music in the Quilter household. My parents owned a phonograph, even in the pre-stereo era, which was not all that common. I mean, it wasn't unusual, but it wasn't, I think they said about 10% of the public owned a record player in the 50s.
Oh, really?
And
okay.
And I had a little child, kiddie record player, and they'd let me play their old 78s after they were tired of them, and they'd buy me little golden records and whatnot. So there was that influence. And, kind of growing up as a, skinny, nerdy kid, I remember many happy hours spent watching early black and white TV with those corny, Mickey Mouse cartoons and Laurel and Hardy shows that always had these catchy little melodies going in the background. So I had kind of a musical soundtrack going with my life, and it was pretty, Ricky Tick by anybody's standards, really. But that was there when I started to get more serious about contemporary music as I got into high school. Now, with all, due modesty, I got to say, us early baby boomers, I was, my high school class was class of 64, so I was in high school from 1960 to 64, was a time of musical magic. Here we were in the early 60s listening to top 40 radio with the most, awful sludge just, being poured out. Oh, those kids will buy anything,
Yeah, I know.
Put more layers of violins in, and then suddenly out of nowhere, it seemed, came this group of kids that called themselves the Beach Boys, and some of their voices were still breaking, but they were singing sunny California harmonies about surfing and hot rod cars and stuff we were interested in. And this can get on the radio and become a hit tune. This is unbelievable. And shortly on their heels came the British invasion with Beatles and Rolling Stones, and I don't suppose we'll ever live long enough to see another total change of scene like that. The, kids discovered that they had buying power, and the, people in charge of the music industry realized this was a demographic that could be, catered to. And within a few short years, music was being made that, was unlike anything that had ever happened before. With people turning, electric guitars up to, 11 and, using, fuzz boxes and, damaging their equipment trying to get a new sound.
And just thoroughly perplexed the parents.
Right. I suppose it's in some sense the duty of every young generation to alarm their parents. But, this was really something. And what was also unique about it was that it was being built on a very straight, square foundation. America coming out of the 50s was, a well-organized place with a strong middle class, a clear way, for young people to succeed. Rents were affordable, gas was cheap. It was, we didn't have a lot of the advantages we have today, but you could do stuff. And from that background, that the early drug-induced experimentation set in, but there was, they had material, it wasn't just random noise. They were taking stuff you'd learned in music class and doing something new with it. And that was really special. And by now I'm going to college, and we're into the mid 60s.
Right.
And so I'm, I was a classic nerd, skinny kid growing up, like things more, socially awkward, would rather play with things than people, But so in college, I'm taking engineering, originally mechanical engineering, but then I got interested in electronics, trying to fix up an old radio and put together, some kind of record player because I liked music. And, it was a era where, 45s and LPs were selling like hotcakes. And in the course of doing this, I began to teach myself audio. And I was building on a foundation of my high school physics class. I was very fortunate to go to the top school in Honolulu when my pop was stationed there near Pearl Harbor when I was going to high school. Mm-hmm. And it was a very good school. And they had this little, 1 week of the high school physics class that dealt with electronics, elements of electronics. And I'm thinking, a resistor, capacitor. Oh, that's interesting. And I kind of filed it away. But about 2 years later, I was building on that knowledge and starting to hand build little gadgets and doodads to play music. And one of my first objectives was to build something loud enough to play in a car that didn't have a radio, which happened to be our 1951 Volkswagen that my pop had gotten. And so I kind of invented a boombox, maybe, 10 or 20 years before that was commonplace. And things happened. My grade point average got sort of, distracted, and I came out to California in '67. Went to a local junior college and state college to kind of get my grade point up. But meanwhile, my younger brother, Matt Quilter, icon of Orange County surf music preservation, spot the plug, was just getting started with rock music. And he owned our pop bought him a cheap Japanese guitar with four pickups.
Yes,
and,
I remember some of those. And they're all being made again today now,
Yeah, well, if he had that Marco Polo branded Teisco guitar and amplifier, it'd probably be worth, 20 times what Pop probably paid for it. But anyway, he was, starting to, get on with, what was rapidly becoming the, kind of blues-driven psychedelic music scene, and I'm watching him go and thinking, it'd be kind of interesting. He had a bass player in this high school band he was trying to get started, and we went shopping for a bass amp, and we're totally discouraged by the pricing of the commercial equipment, and he had saved up about $250, which was, not even a fraction of what, a name brand amp cost in those days. And I said, well, gee, if there isn't anything you can buy, I could probably make you something for that. And he goes, really? Well, I read this story about something called bridging, how to get more power out of transistors. And he says, well, you go, and I had to do everything over twice before it worked, but at the end of the day, I kind of added it all up, and I think I made about 3 cents an hour on this thing. But if I didn't have to do it over twice, I'd actually, make some money on it.
Right.
Now that I know what I'm doing, hoo-ha. Yeah. And so in the summer of '68, Quilter Sound Company threw open its doors in a obscure little shop in the low-rent side of Costa Mesa, California. And we waited for the world to beat a path to our door, which didn't really happen. But we were a part of our little local Orange County music scene, and I was still had a lot more to learn than I realized at the time. But we were, just putting one foot in front of the other. But above all else, my goal was to rock out, to build the equivalent of hot rod amplifiers.
I remember some of those that were quite big.
Well, every big was good back then. And in fact, it's kind of what it took in the days when a 25-watt speaker was considered high-powered. If you wanted to, really, punch out a big sound, you needed a Marshall stack with 8 12s in it or something. And so, we were, going along with those lines. But of course, something important happened in the middle of all this. This would have been around the summer, probably the sometime early in 1968. My brother saying, you showed me this album with this wild and crazy looking guy on the cover and said, you got to listen to this. And I'm going, well, who is this guy? I mean, he's dressed so weird. His hair is all frizzed out. He's this weird fisheye, lens angle. And he put it on, and I heard this, and I'm going, who is this? I mean, he's turned up way too loud. This is ridiculous. Well, a month later, I was introduced to marijuana. I guess I can admit that legally now. Yeah. And he said, and Matthew puts the record on kind of, just casually, and and this time I listened to it, and it was awesome. I mean, I listened to this guy. It's like riding a wild horse, turning stuff up way too loud and making it work, and just, turning it into raw emotion, and boy, did I want to be a part of that. And I didn't, particularly fancy myself as a performing and musician, but I thought I could be the power behind the throne, so to speak. So that fired up my enthusiasm to become an amplifier builder. And reason I kind of bring this up is, the whole upper half of the electric guitar, register, if you will, is the overdrive part. And it's, I mean, you ask your average, audio engineer, what's all this about distortion? Just clipping is clipping, I don't even think I like it. Leo Fender probably didn't. He did everything he could to make Fender amps loud but clean. Yeah. And consequently, when we were getting started in 68, there really was a gap in the equipment end of it. You had amps like Fender amps, and remember the tuck and roll custom amps? Sure,
of course, with the glittery
reliable,
amps. Yeah.
But they didn't really do overdrive well. The Fender amps just didn't. He'd gradually kind of taken the mid-range gain out, trying to make it cleaner, because Dick Dale would put them on 10 and blast away, and Dick Dale wanted to be loud, but Leo wanted them to not be too distorted, so he ended up with the famous Fender, EQ smile, lots of treble, not too much mid-range, enough bass to make it sound full, and you'd have this big, bright, brassy, chimey chords and lead, but it wouldn't really roar like a Marshall. And sure. And of course, most of the solid-state amps just didn't sound good with overdrive at all. And so it kind of became my mission to, resolve this. I figured if I could, because we all knew, of course, that transistors were the wave of the future. This tube stuff was old hat. And my goal was to build solid-state amps that two things in mind, that they would sound good in overdrive and they wouldn't blow out, because, we owned old Volkswagens and they didn't have a lot of power, but you could put your foot to the floor all day long and the car would faithfully charge along with everything it had, because it was, designed to run at that speed indefinitely. And an amp will only go so loud. So my theory was, well, just make sure all the parts will carry that full peak power, and, you should be able to blast away for all it's worth. Turned out there's a little more to reliability than just that, although that's critical. So our early stuff did have a spotty record, but, we would always fix it up and make good. But to make a long story even more tedious, by the early 70s, it had become clear that we had missed, and by now I had two good partners working with me, Barry and John Andrews, who would go on to become, the mainstay management at QSC Audio. We took a good hard look at where we were, and we said, we've kind of missed the boat on guitar amps. Marshall fixed their reliability problems. Custom kind of came and went. This new guy, Peavy, showed up from Meridian, Mississippi, selling stuff at retail for less than we could build it at wholesale. Yeah. And it wasn't the best stuff, but it played, and it was loud, and it wasn't, it was sturdy, you couldn't really fault it, from a value standpoint. So we said, I think I just don't think we see a future in guitar amps. We're going to have to, find some other area that's, a little more predictable, a little steadier, maybe a little less glamorous, but, something we can just, make a living at. And a little bit of history. At this point in time, this very clever guy named Greg Mackey had come out of nowhere with a textbook in hand and built the first op-amp-based mixer, the Tapco 6-channel mixer. And he was offering unheard of studio-grade specs at a lower than ever retail cost because he was quick to recognize the opportunity that these little integrated circuit gain blocks could replace, a host of discrete transistors at very little cost, and they were very reliable. Long as you followed the rules and gave them the right supply voltage and a little resistance at the input and output.
And we're coming to you. We're coming to you through a Mackie mixer right now as well. So
anyway, so he had suddenly revolutionized the mixer market. And was doing great, and went on to continue to do great. So we're kind of looking at ourselves. Well, guess we can't go there. They're already there. We did make one token 6-channel mixer that was, had its merits. But so we said, well, what's the one thing we've learned how to do in the School of Hard Knocks that you can't get out of the back of a textbook? And it was the power amp part of guitar amps.
Sure.
The power section was, of course, the part that took the most stress, and we'd learned how to make an amp that would stay together even when you pushed it, into full overdrive. And that knowledge, meant something. So we said, well, let's become a little power amp company. We can sell them on paper. It's kind of you don't really have to, test drive it at one amp. It's going to sound pretty much like another. You're going to buy it kind of on specs, which is not the case, of course, with musical instruments. The buyer really wants to put their hands on and, feel the guitar and listen to the amp and play through it and see how it really, performs. And so, but power amps you can kind of sell on paper. Look, here's 150 watt amp, so many dollars, this is the size, fits in a rack, how many do you want, And so we, QSC Audio was kind of created out of the ashes of Quilter Sound Company, and we, entered the market with a, low-end line of what we now look back on as our tin wonders, kind of a, galvanized metal box with a aluminum faceplate that also dissipated the heat, and occasionally people would try to light their cigarettes on it. We did get more than one request. If you just put an ashtray on. But, we just kept putting one foot in front of the other, and decades went by, and I continued to, develop my art as an amp designer, and QSC became a world force in pro audio. And
and they had a big building over off of near Talbert or one of those.
We actually have a number of big buildings. For a long time, we remained in the humble digs where Quilter Sound Company had first started over on the low rent side of Costa Mesa. But, as business continued to develop, we would, take over the next adjacent unit, and pretty soon we'd pretty much outgrown these ramshackle Quonset huts and little concrete tilt-ups, and we actually got into our first real building in the very early 90s, and it was a very scary time for the company because our rent was suddenly going to double, and we weren't sure if we could, what if the business dropped off for whatever reason? What would happen? But as it happened, that was a very good year for us. It felt like, I maybe by coincidence, maybe we just got lucky, but our sales took a big jump that year. It was almost like we took a deep breath and just sort of rose to the occasion. And we had a decent production line finally that, with actual material handling, and it was all thought through from the beginning. It wasn't pieced together, 1 year at a time. And the company started to become the well-oiled machine it is now. And so that was a huge step forward. And that was the building we now call MacArthur 1. And
it's a big, it's very long, sort of narrow building, if I remember correctly, black.
Well, it's actually pretty square, but we built a second one next door a few years later.
Okay.
So, yeah, there's kind of like a campus now that runs along the street for quite a ways.
In fact, I used to have an office over there not far from there on Cadillac, which was one of the side streets.
Well,
so I was over there.
As I'm sitting here, I'm speaking to you from the corner of Cadillac and Sunflower.
Well, that's really where we were at. I mean, I'm thinking it was... they were kind of interesting buildings. They had like these square windows that kind of...
Well, that's across the street.
Okay.
And be amazed what's going on there now. But it has a lot to do with intense banks of grow lights.
Okay.
We're across the street from Costa Mesa's, pot growing district.
Got it. Okay.
But anyway,
I haven't been over there in a while.
So part of QSC's third building, our Sunflower Warehouse, and now QSC has a larger warehouse in Corona, California. So, QSC, just by dint of putting one foot in front of the other, trying to maintain a good, healthy corporate culture where, we try to solve problems by getting as many of the facts on the table as we can come up with, kind of organizing them. Everybody takes a good hard look at it. Well, what are we going to do with this? Well, how about this? Okay. And, nobody really has to yell at people to do this or that. We kind of figure out what needs to be done, and we, divvy up the tasks, and we go to it. So, consequently, QSC has had excellent, staff longevity. People have, worked there for 20, 30, 40 years in some cases. And, people like working there. We get voted as a top 10 place in Orange County. And meanwhile, we've just continued to do a lot of good work. My role at the company was power amp designer, and I did that for 40 years. Going from the early primitive little 150 watt, faceplate heatsink jobs to, elaborate fan cooled amps with high power Class D circuitry, putting out any one of our current amplifiers, that fits in a 2RU space has more power than the entire Fillmore had back in the late 60s. I mean, I couldn't believe it when somebody said, "Oh, the Fillmore, they've got 11 Crown DC 300s. Well, that's impossible. Who would need that much power?" And it's like 5,000 watts, one decent, high-end pro audio amp easily exceeds that nowadays.
And so just a matter of technicality, your connection to QSC today is still what? I mean, we know we're going to transition. We're going to get into Quilter Labs, but I wanted to make sure that we've got that.
I'm keeping an eye on the clock here, and I know you have a certain set time for these podcasts.
Have plenty of time. We have plenty of time for you. We have lots of time left.
So 2011 rolls around, nothing, and 40 years of making power amps. I mean, it's a good run. And of course, the smartest thing I ever did as a business owner was to empower my partners, because I was not a good business manager. My theory of business management is, what do you mean we're out of resistors? I just bought 100 a couple of weeks ago, Right. So those partners I mentioned, Barry and John Andrews, ended up running the company while I ended up being the senior engineer. And as we got bigger, obviously we had to hire more people in all areas. So as the years went by, QSC expanded into loudspeakers, powered loudspeakers, digital audio processing and networking, and now the company is heading in the direction of corporate AV conference room networking and audio video distribution.
Wow.
But we've still got a strong foundation. I think the QSC's current K.2 series powered loudspeakers are a best-selling brand in the industry. And they just they sound great. The values I brought to the table were, number one, the stuff's got to work, and that goes back to the days when if it didn't work, I had to fix it, and I needed to be busy making something new so we could sell it and make some money.
Yeah, so you had an incentive.
So making stuff that works, making stuff that plays well, and making stuff that will play loud gracefully. Obviously, you don't really drive PA speakers into conscious overdrive like you would a guitar amp, but people will occasionally try to get as much or more out of them as they're really able to do. And one of the skill sets we have at QSC is protection circuits that keep the thing from blowing up, but still allow it to make as much music as possible in as graceful a manner as possible. And that sort of show must go on mentality is one of those values I kind of learned early on as, watching people play stuff on stage and dealing with the occasional breakdowns and so forth. So anyway, I came to the real feeling, I was, in my mid 60s. The company was, the engineering department was way bigger than any single person could manage. And I needed to, make room for, the up and coming engineers. And of course, QSC had whole engineering departments, digital and acoustic and so forth that, I didn't, I would look in on them and give advice and be part of the kind of approval committee, but, I wasn't doing the work there. So I said, time to retire. And what am I going to do now? Well, along the way, I have always enjoyed playing music for fun. So, I'm at this point, a decent steel guitar, lap steel player. I can chum along pretty well. I occasionally have my moments. I really enjoy the instrument. I can noodle on a number of other things. And the idea of sitting down with people and jamming out some music. I mean, it's a whole other side of the human mind that I hope we don't forget as we civilization continues to charge along into our brave digital future. This idea that people from whole different countries can sit next to each other, somebody can start playing, and as long as everybody's tuned up in the same key, you recognize the song or at least the pattern of the song, you can jump in and be part of a performance without even having to know a word of each other's language. And I think that's meaningful. And anyway, so I'm thinking, all right, now I'm going to retire, and maybe make more music. Gee whiz, I think I'll go out and get some kind of decent amp that doesn't weigh too much. I mean, of course, I was well aware that tube amps had retained their popularity in the guitar market, and even back in the day, people were always showing me, yeah, your solid state stuff's pretty good, but it doesn't have this or that my favorite tube amp has. Well, show me what you mean. And they would bring it in. Well, yeah, you're right. That amp's got something, and and I would learn something new. And unfortunately, just about the time I was putting that all together, we exited the guitar amp business and turned into QSC Audio.
Sure, right.
But, spring would roll around and the sap would rise, and I would think, what about trying to make the perfect solid state guitar amp? And I had a couple of, spare time prototypes over those decades. So I had a certain amount of, pump priming, if you will, when I was out there looking for an amp for myself, and there weren't any. I mean, there were still, of course, tube amps, but they were still, as always, heavy and somewhat limited in what you could get out of them. And by at that point, the digital modeling thing was in full swing, but it just wasn't the same. It didn't, and even though the amps themselves were solid state, they weren't that. I mean, they were still kind of heavy and not, didn't really have a nice warm quality to them. And so I said, seriously, nobody's figured this out after all this time? I know it had been promised many and many a time, and I would go and play the major brands, proud declarations that this transistorized amp sounds just as good as our tube amps, and I'd play it, and well, no, it doesn't. And solid state became kind of relegated as the low end thing you bought if you couldn't afford something decent. So I said, well, gee whiz. QSC had its 40th anniversary in 2008. From when I started Quilter Sound in 1968, and at that time the marketing department commissioned a whole batch of cheap Epiphone guitars. They'd put your corporate logo on them if you ordered enough of them, and so that was fun. And, well, gee, if we're gonna have celebratory anniversary guitars, why don't we have a celebratory Quilter amplifier? And so I quickly took some of that knowledge that I mentioned that I'd been working on and on my spare time, and we put together this solid state amp with a switching power supply and a very nice, at the time, Celestion's finest neo-magnet guitar speaker, and made this 50-watt open-back combo, and I gave it this kind of rakish tilt to the cabinet design. It sort of tilted back about 15 degrees. So, Of course, we had to call it the Slant Master, and and we made 100 of them, and they sounded great. And people were kind of going, maybe you should, make more of these. And this was 2008, so I wasn't quite ready to retire. But we put these batch of amps out there, and so in 2011, I said, maybe I should get serious about this. And so with a couple of partners here at Quilter Labs, Chris Parks and Robert Becker, we declared bravely that we were in business at the turn of the New Year's clock of 01/01/01/01, New Year's morning of 2011. We had a New Year's party and proudly declared that Quilter Labs was open for big business. And, of course, it took us about a year to actually work up a product. But next thing you know, we were showing at NAMM and selling, trying to get dealers and, looking for reps. It's a full catastrophe. And
all of those things that are required. Tell me a little bit about some of the technical part of that. When you was that spun off from QSC, or was this something completely separate in any way, or how would you describe it?
What I would say is a good guitar amp is like the complete flip side of a good pro audio amplifier. It's like backwards day. You take the same stuff and you do everything the other way. So, a good pro audio amp is ideally it's perfectly clean, has no personality at all, plays very, very loud without any breakup, has the speaker on a very tight leash, so the speaker fidelity of the speaker is as good as it can be, and all of this is easily measured on the bench, and you can say, it's got 0.01% distortion, and it goes from 20 to 20K with perfectly flat, and it's got 1,000 watts of power. This is going to be a good amp, and pretty much is, unless there's some bad habits you haven't noticed that, gets in the way of actual performance. Right. But you find those things out pretty quick. Guitar amps are completely different. The history of the electric guitar started off in a very interesting direction when they started to figure out how to amplify a guitar in the early 30s. The guitar as an instrument, of course, goes back centuries, but it was never considered it wasn't the kind of instrument that could keep up in a big band. And, the early 20s bands had, banjos for rhythm instruments, but, good, archtop guitars have, a little more expressiveness and tone, but they're not even as loud as a banjo.
Yeah. Right.
So when it came time to think about, we got these, radios with 5-watt amps and whatnot. Why can't we hook a guitar to it? But there had to be some kind of pickup. And there could have been two kinds of pickups. They had piezoelectric crystals back then, but they weren't stable. They absorbed humidity and would disintegrate. So the Rochelle salt crystal could have become a pickup much like a modern acoustic guitar pickup, but they weren't usable. So they said, well, what else can we do? Well, let's wind a zillion turns of wire around a magnet, put it close to the strings, and when the strings move, the magnet will pick that up and induce a signal in the wire, and we'll hook that to an amplifier. And so the magnetic pickup was born. Well, that worked, but it has a very unique sound. It's round and only emphasizes the harmonics that lay over the position of the pickup. If the string overtone happens to have a node there, it won't register on that pickup. So it creates a very unique tone to the signal that's very dependent on where the pickup is along the neck of the guitar. So you got your bridge pickup and your neck pickup and maybe one in between. But that rounded tone, when plugged into an early, relatively crude tube amplifier, produced that fat, bloopy sound that we now think of as the classic jazz guitar tone. And I'm sure the early guitar players were going, this doesn't really sound very much like a guitar, but on the other hand, they could hear me now. And it didn't take long for musicians like, Charlie Christian to say, this could be like a whole new thing. I mean, I don't have to just kind of shelang along like, strumming a rhythm part. This thing's loud enough. I can play single note runs and do something with it. And, by the mid-30s, you had, of course, lap steel players were quick to jump on this. The Hawaiian guys had no preconceived idea of, what they were supposed to sound like, and they were very happy at first to get resophonic guitars and then amplified guitars. They could just be heard in a club and, increase the tips, Anyway, by the end of the 30s, you had early guitar players exploring, the jazz capabilities of Bob Wills. You listened to early Bob Wills stuff in the late 30s.
Good stuff.
They were rocking out. They were working the amp. It wasn't just that it wasn't loud enough. You could hear them, consciously exploiting, sustain and such like, even in the studio. So, it was becoming explored. Well, all of this background is just to point out that, the electric guitar grew up with the vacuum tube amp, which was something that was just kind of a standard building block. You got it out of the back of the RCA tube manual. Here's the circuit for a 15-watt amplifier. Here's the circuit for a 30-watt amp. Use these tubes, use those tubes. And so that's what people built. Well, it turned out that those circuits behave in some musically very interesting ways, especially in the area of overdrive, but even in the area of clean tone. They have a low damping factor, which allows the speaker tone to develop more fully. They have very unique qualities in overdrive, which add, more harmonic richness and, in a very interesting, subtle way, better chord definition even when you're well into overdrive than you would get with just a plain old, clipping circuit, like a tube screamer or something. And all of this was, instinctively recognized by the musician, but not apparently well recognized by the, engineering community, because with all due modesty, I really haven't seen anybody put all of the elements together that we're doing here at Quilter Labs to produce a modern lightweight amp that's really got that nice, brilliant, warm, vintage tone quality that's still fully adjustable, that you can play loud or soft and, pick it up and, tote it out of the building without straining your hand. And so that's kind of my mission here at Quilter Labs, is to, bring those elements, to life for the benefit of today's generation of players.
And you have quite a a product line now. I mean, I've looked at it, and it's just really fascinating. You've had some great reviews of the products, and let's shift a little bit and talk a little bit about as we say, the here and now. And where you're at. We've got NAMM coming up in a couple of weeks.
Right.
And I know you guys are going to be out there. So let's talk a little bit about where Quilter Labs is today in terms of your product line and what you'll be bringing out to NAMM and get us kind of a present view of things.
Okay. A couple of things I can say that were not entirely obvious to me. I mean, the first one was, but the second one has been somewhat of a learning experience. One thing we all know to our great regret, musicians haven't gotten a raise in 50 years. I mean, honestly, you play for the same number of dollars you did back in the late 60s, and the dollar is worth, like 20% of what it used to be if you're lucky. So, working musicians, are still as hard pressed as ever to, afford good gear and get on with performing their art. So it's, we make stuff that's not compromised down to a price, and, people who can afford it really appreciate what we're doing. But to be honest, we're at kind of the upper end of the price range. So, we're not a mass market seller, although we're, working our way in that direction year by year. The other big factor, which I didn't really know going in, was that the bulk of today's guitar players are essentially what we, dare I say, bedroom players. They play kind of for themselves.
That's me.
And me. I play out now and then, but most of my playing is done recreationally, and that's. Well, should it be? I mean, it's a wonderful way to kind of, do something different, put your head in a different place, and, and get results, do something nice. And like playing with people is always very fun. Anyway, so we've come to realize that there is a whole area of the market that we're not really serving with our remarkably loud, stage-worthy, but ultra-lightweight combos. That's all very well, but most people need something, frankly, it doesn't even make any noise. They want to play through headphones or go straight into a recording rig and hear it on their monitors or whatever. So in the last couple of years, we've been working up a set of direct coupled features, a good cab sim circuit, some nice user friendly voicing and switching options that you can plug straight into a PA or a recording rig and actually get a good sound, which once again you would think in this modern age of digital modeling would have been a solved problem. But practically everybody complains that yes, this gadget I have has got a million sounds in it, but I can't tweak them easily. I'm not I'm not particularly happy with what I'm getting. And so one thing you'll see at the NAMM show is our new Interblock 45, which has been out for a few months, but it is our second pedal-sized microamp with happens to have a 33-watt power chip in it, but it also has all the things you need to actually get a perfectly good sound through a PA or a recording rig. And we did a little block party premiere for these things, and we had a dummy set of amps across the back of the stage, but we were all secretly plugged in through our first batch of interblocks. And I had some local guys, Tommy Harkenreiter and his Western Swing friends, and we came and we had a fine old time, played a nice set, and then we did the big reveal. This nice sound you've been listening to is all, we haven't even turned those amps behind us on. It's all what you heard in the PA was plugged in straight. And it's like people, my brother, my lifelong, supporter and strictest critic, said, seriously, that was a gadget. That wasn't, because, he plays a Quilter amp. They asked me why I play a Quilter, because they gave me one. But, but he has been one of my tone meisters, over the years. And when he had a tube amp I built for him 40 some years ago that he played for 40 years. But he says, Pat, I got to tell you, your new stuff, I don't need the old, my old standby anymore, as great as it was. I'm getting everything I want out of my Micro Pro and my, 101 reverb and whatever, Anyway, that's kind of, I would say, a new direction for us is to build on the, we know how to get good tone in a combo, and it actually is very helpful to have that as a tone standard, because then I can adjust the analog cab sim till it sounds about like the combo sounds, and at that point, through a monitor, through a PA. And when you get there, well, then it's as playable as as the live speaker. And I'm as a musician, I'm not exactly thrilled about piping everything through one big system, but that's the reality we live in these days. And with all the good work that QSC has done among other companies, PAs are very good now. And so honestly, from the standpoint of audience, listening satisfaction, and with good if you have a good modern mixer where you can get individual monitor mixes, you can hear yourself on stage just as well, and the audience can get a good mix that's free of stage clutter, and the drums aren't rattling, and it does clean things up.
Yeah, I can understand that. One of the things I'm always curious about at these shows is, and it's a little more esoteric kind of question, but really, what do you hope to accomplish at the NAMM show for your business? What might be the overarching goal that you have out there?
Well, that is a very good question, and one we ask ourselves every year as we're, struggling to, set up and tear down. But, we're part of a community. The music industry, it is an industry, it's a business, you got to make money and keep the doors open. But, we make music, and our trade shows, reflect that, a lot of music going on, a lot of community building, a lot of meeting old friends. From a business standpoint, obviously we hope to get exposure. We hope to, show the world that we're going the distance. In fact, this year, we have moved our booth to Hall D among all the other loud guitar amps, and we will have our shiny silver Airstream trailer as a eye-catching,
oh, that's cool.
Prop in the back of the booth, and a very handy sound room.
How big of a booth does that require, Pat?
We had to get I think a 20 by 30 island or something. Okay. So it was kind of a big step up expense-wise. We were, but last year's little 10 by 10, we were, taking over the aisle and causing traffic jams.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So we had to do, we knew it was time to move up a little. But
I was trying to figure how much an Airstream trailer, how much space that takes. That's quite.
Well, they come in different lengths, but it'll take up, the back, not quite the back half of the booth, but, as a demo room and a meeting space,
I see, sure.
It'll be a big asset.
That's a novel way to do it.
Right. And it looks cool. And, it's a lot of, we have to polish it again. It's a lot of trouble to get it looking good, but it will draw traffic, and folks will be able to see us, and
it'll make it easier for me to find you. That's for sure.
Well, and we've got our first overhead hanging, one of those, square-sided banner things, with my publicity picture on it with my Mountain Man buckskins on, which it looks like I'm going to be wearing on the show floor. So
that'll be fun.
So, yeah, look for the geezer with his grizzled buckskins, and that'll be me.
Let me sort of finalize things here with what is typically kind of a perspective question, and I always like to ask people from a broader industry perspective. How do you see the opportunities or potential challenges on a broader scale going forward? Do you have an opinion on that?
Oh, yes. We all have opinions. Well, here's the grim reality. The electric guitar business is not, as we speak, a growing market. It's been, pretty stable. It's an established instrument, and although our pro audio sales manager at QSC, Gene Jolly, who worked at Guitar Center some years ago, he's always willing to say, well, we're just one Guitar Hero away from a renaissance. But, there's so much else to spend your money on these days, and video games and whatnot. And even in the guitar business, the acoustic guitar with a modern plug-in capability has become a much bigger part of the scene than it ever used to be. So with that in mind, my hope is provide, equipment of a caliber that people will kind of collect in 50 years, like we collect vintage Fenders and even the custom tuck and roll amps, and look back and say, well, this was a cool stuff, and it was an art form of its time, and meanwhile, we're kind of living the dream, how to make $1 million in guitar amps, spend $3 and
good luck
with that. But honestly, I have done very well in my career at QSC Audio. Our success is based on the fact that people still want to gather together and listen to music as an audience and enjoy the live music performance. And if it turns out that I never really make a dime selling Quilter guitar amps, but we can make thousands of people happier and more capable as artists, I'll go to my grave thinking I did, that was a perfectly good way to, finish off my run here.
Well,
that's where we're at.
It's quite a career, just some really, really great information and a wonderful story. And I know that we took a sizable chunk of your time out today, and I really appreciate you coming on the show with us, Pat.
Well, I appreciate you having me. Yes, I know we've babbled on for a long time, but it has been fun. It's been nice being able to share, some of my story. And if I'll wait for the 3 eager listeners to send me fan mail.
I think there'll be a lot more than 3, Pat. So that's we've come a long way since the early days when we had 3. So,
okay. Well, good luck to you and your show.
Okay.
And again, thanks for having me on.
So what did you think of the interview with Pat Quilter? We always want to hear from you, and you can do that easily through our contact page on our website at guitarbusinessradio.com or on our Facebook and Twitter pages at Guitar Business, or just email us directly at contact@guitarbusinessradio.com. And you know the drill. If none of that works for you, just call us on our GBR hotline at 888-777-2404. You can do that right now if you like, or later. Operators are standing by or sitting down. In either case, they're waiting for your call. Now, I have to tell you, I was just fascinated listening to Pat, and upon thinking about it, I'm pretty sure I've learned more about this business in the last year doing this show than in the whole 40 years I've been in the business. And of course, it's not all about just listening to the interview several times between doing it, editing it, and then listening to the complete show. But the process of putting all the interviews together requires me to spend the time researching who I'm talking to. And that's a whole nother avenue to lots of information I didn't possess beforehand. And what's kind of funny about that is that I didn't really realize it all that much along the way. I was just doing what I had to do to be able to conduct a decent interview. And if you're a regular listener, you may have remembered me saying, probably on more than one occasion, how important it is to stop on a regular basis and review your accomplishments over time. The reason is that more often than not, we don't see it when it's happening. We're busy or we have other things on our mind, and the problem with that is it's really easy to draw the wrong conclusion that we're not accomplishing anything. You know what that leads to. And I say that because as we approach our 1-year anniversary next week and our 50th episode, I'm reminded of all the times during the year that I had momentary doubts about the show, whether I would get an interview in time to get the episode out or if anyone really liked the show. That's not positive thinking, and I've said so many times, but when I stop for a moment and I look back at the beginning and how far we've come with this on many fronts, I have every reason to feel pretty darn good about it. So I'll have a little more to say about the first year of GBR on next week's show, but in the lead up to that, remember to stay positive, stay focused on your destination, but keep all those options open on how you're going to get there. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again on episode 50. And that's it for this episode of Guitar Business Radio. Thanks for being with us. You can stay tuned and stay in touch at guitarbusinessradio.com.